Good evening and welcome to the City of Farmers Branch Planning and Zoning Meeting. It is presently 6:30 p.m., January 13th, 2025. I'd like to first begin by thanking the commissioners for their service. Up first in our study session, we have item A1, discuss regular agenda items. And that takes us to item C1, consider approval of the December 9th, 2024 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes and take appropriate action. Commissioners, any errors, typos, omissions to our minutes? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item D1, which is a public hearing. I'm reminding myself. We will conduct a public hearing and consider the request for a zoning amendment for a self-storage facility on approximately 9.72 acres located at 11410 Mathis Avenue within PD 22 zoning district and take appropriate action.
Commissioners, any question on this request? It is a zoning amendment for a self-storage facility. And I would like to clarify that you'll notice in the staff report, there is an extensive history of some zoning and building code violations that have gone on with this property. And so that is important information, of course, and we wanted to make sure it was included in your materials. However, I want to make the distinction that the discussion tonight is related to the land use specifically and whether or not that is appropriate in this location. The discussion about enforcement and violation history is separate and is still ongoing and active. It doesn't dispute that. Zoning is just sort of a first step in the situation. So, any questions on this item?
Do I need to repeat what I've sent you, or do you want to talk to them?
Either way.
Okay. I sent some questions to Sarah so she could just have a heads up on them. One of the questions was, is this variance or this zoning change just for this property, or is it for all of PD 22?
It's a great question. This request is specific to the subject property and it only applies to this platted lot.
Okay, and when this current owner sells this property, if they ever do, does the right to self-storage business zoning transfer to the new owner as well?
Yes, it would. The zoning regulations stay in place regardless of sale.
And is there any change to signage permissions related to this zoning change?
No, the applicant has not requested to vary from the signage regulations in PD 22.
Thank you.
No problem.
Sir,
Go ahead.
Sarah, I had a question with regard to the landscaping. I noted that the property was originally built in 1980, and my thought process was they alluded to adding shrubbery to the landscaping, but I don't remember reading anything about irrigated land requirements, irrigation requirements, and I'm thinking because it was in 1980, it may or may not have been irrigated at that time.
That's a great question. Irrigation is required for any new landscaping, so I can't speak to the current status of what's out there, but new plantings would need to be irrigated.
Is it necessary that it be referred to irrigated system instead of just landscaping? In other words, should it be specifically mentioned in the ordinance or whatever we approved?
Right, that language is in our zoning ordinance, so it would apply by default, but we can add it for clarification as well.
Okay, thank you.
And this is for 11410 Mathis. 11420, is that the same building, two addresses?
Yeah,
And is it, this doesn't apply to 420? Is that right? Is there, or is it, like, where is the distinction? Where does one begin and the other end?
right. There are 3 suites in this building. They each have separate addresses. The proposal for the storage facility would occupy 11410 and 11420, but for notification purposes, we refer to just a singular address. That's the address on their website. And it's the
You
primary.
say it would occupy, but just making sure it is currently being operated as a self-storage
That's correct,
facility.
yes. Without a valid certificate of occupancy.
Right.
Other questions? Commissioners, other questions for staff? And Sarah, you'll be presenting this?
Correct.
This is kind of a broad question, so you may not have the answer at the moment, but why do we consider self-storage separate from warehousing?
Self-storage, the definition is specific to the layout of the building. So you have, rather than a single warehouse with a single user, you have 100 individual sub-spaces that are leased out for warehousing use. So that's where the distinction comes in. The definition of self-storage facility in our ordinance does not distinguish between storage of personal and business property. And so when we reviewed this with our city attorney team, that was the definition that applied in this case.
Any additional questions for staff? Go ahead.
One last thought, is this going to be air-conditioned storage? I'm just thinking because it's on the inside of a building.
Yes, the current building is air-conditioned and
Is
will
it?
remain.
Okay.
So it's currently being used as a self-storage facility.
Yes, the report details the history. There was work without permits done, and the facility was occupied without a certificate of occupancy. So we are working with them to move towards compliance, but the first step is establishing whether the use can be permitted, because building permits cannot be issued for a use that's not allowed. So zoning is step one.
So how did it come about that we figured that out?
That kind of history is detailed in the staff report, but essentially permits were applied for, denied, a fire inspection, found that the work was done. So
Sarah,
enforcement is ongoing in that regard.
Sarah, is the definition of self-storage being proposed a current definition that we use in the city, or is it a new or a changed?
It's the current definition for this request, with additional standards built into the ordinance for this use.
Can you point out the difference?
Yes, absolutely. I have a slide. Let me go around to the podium. So these are the standards specific to the subject property that are included in your draft ordinance for consideration. They limit the uses that would be allowed within the facility to storage warehousing, wholesale, and office. There's a conference room within the facility that can be utilized by tenants. It prohibits specifically, just for clarification, uses like retail, automotive, and machine shop. And then they are requesting to vary from the PD 22 parking requirements, because as self-storage is not allowed right now within PD 22, there's no parking requirement associated with it. So they're requesting to default to what our comprehensive zoning ordinance requires, which is 1 space per 400 square feet of office and 1 space per 2,000 square feet of warehousing. This has the standard regarding landscaping being installed. And then the remainder is language to clarify that even if the zoning request is approved, building permit, certificate of occupancy, and all violations must be addressed. And section G down here calls out that a certificate of occupancy would be issued to a primary certificate holder, which is the primary tenant, and then they would manage subleases. But all uses within the building are subject to adopted codes and annual inspection.
So the only deviation from the self-storage definition we're using is the parking allowance?
That's the only deviation from PD 22.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions on this one?
Looks like we don't have any additional questions, so thank you, Sarah, for that. With that, that takes us then for our study session to adjournment, and we will reconvene. Oh, yes.
We have,
Oh, yes,
What-
sorry, I need to go back. I'm so sorry. You are absolutely right. We need to go to item A2, introduction of our new planning department staff and update on training opportunities. My apologies.
no problem. I just wanted to take a moment to formally introduce Brett Mangum. He's the new lead planner with our team, and he joins us with several years of experience in the DFW area, as well as an AICP certification. So we're really excited to have him on board. Just wanted to give him a warm welcome.
Good to meet everybody. Just a little bit about me. Prior to joining the team here in Farmers Branch, I worked with the city of Fort Worth as a senior planner, and before that, started out in planning in Granbury. So if y'all are familiar with Granbury, it's about an hour down the road on the other side of Fort Worth. I'm a Dallas, was born in Duncanville, so grew up in the area. I'm familiar with Farmers Branch, grew up in the Metroplex, so I'm happy to be here and joining the team. Look forward to working with all of you.
Great.
And then Brian Campbell is going to give us a quick update on an upcoming training opportunity that was emailed out earlier today.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Brian Campbell, Senior Planning Technician. Just wanted to provide y'all with a quick update regarding Focus North Texas. Registration is now open. So the handout that I gave you all, as well as emailed y'all earlier this evening, has a link where you can go to register. And I also put the address of the Weston Galleria because I believe that was missing on the previous handout. So anyway, that'll be Friday, February 21st. And if y'all can make it, we would look forward to having you there. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Brian. Just of note of additional training opportunities, as I mentioned last time, did want to note that the University of Texas at Arlington has published 6 new textbooks that are open educational resources. That's free online textbooks for anyone interested. They all 6 happen to be in transportation planning, and while I know most of our issues are more in the land use realm, we do bring up transportation issues from time to time. So they're a resource, of course, for our commissioners or our staff, and I think Brian can send maybe links out if folks request that or need that. He has that information. So it's always nice to have free education available online. So an opportunity that from our local university. So thank y'all for that. And now we will go to item A3 to discuss agenda items for future Planning and Zoning Commission consideration. Any items, commissioners? All right, seeing none, that now brings us to adjournment. Apologies earlier. And it is presently 6:43 p.m. and we will reconvene at 7. Thank you all. Good evening and welcome to the City of Farmers Branch Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. It is presently 7 p.m. on Monday, January 13th, 2025. I'd like to begin by thanking the commissioners for their service. Then we will move to citizen comments. This agenda item provides an opportunity for citizens to address the Planning and Zoning Commission on any matter that is not posted on the agenda. Anyone wishing to address the commission should complete a citizen's comments registration form and submit it to the chair prior to the start of the meeting. There is a 3-minute time limit for each citizen to speak, with a reasonable limitation on speakers on any one topic or item, with a maximum of 15 total minutes on the same topic item. Anyone wishing to speak shall be courteous and cordial. The Planning and Zoning Commission is not permitted to take action on any subject raised by a speaker during citizen comments. When called, please approach the podium and state your name and address prior to beginning your comment. Please direct all comments to the commission and not to the audience. And this evening, we have no citizen comments forms received, so we will move to our regular agenda items. Item C1, consider approval of the December 9th, 2024 Planning and Zoning Commission meetings and take appropriate action. Commissioners?
I make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Thank you. Who has a second? Harold does, okay. Just making sure I've got that for the record. Any further comments on the item? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you all. Up next, we'll have a public hearing. Item D1, conduct a public hearing and consider the request for a zoning amendment for a self-storage facility on approximately 9.72 acres located at 11410 Mathis Avenue within PD 22 zoning district and take appropriate action. Thank you, Sarah.
Good evening, Commissioners. Sarah Bergman, Deputy Director of Planning. This property is located along Mathis Avenue near the southern city limit line. The current zoning is Plan Development PD 22, and the applicant is proposing to develop a self-storage facility within this building. The existing warehouse building here is divided into 3 suites, and the self-storage facility occupies 2. Currently, that is not a permitted use in PD 22, and so the applicant is proposing this zoning amendment to add the use to this property. The development is a little bit unique in that while it is a self-storage facility by definition, this development does not offer storage for personal use. It is aimed at small businesses and commercial small-scale storage warehousing uses. So if approved, the uses within the facility would be limited to those shown on your screen. And because PD 22 does not call out self-storage facilities currently, there's no parking requirement associated with this use. The applicant is proposing to align with the requirement in the comprehensive zoning ordinance of 1 space per 400 square feet of office and 1 space per 2,000 square feet of warehousing, which is slightly different from PD 22 standards. Because this is an existing building, the loading doors for the storage area do face towards public right-of-way for Mathis Avenue. So the applicant is proposing to install some new landscape screening along that frontage to more closely comply with current screening standards. No other exterior site modifications are proposed. Here's a few photos of the existing site conditions. This one is from the southern end of the building, and then this would be along Mathis Avenue, and here's an interior photo of the storage units. This request is consistent with the comprehensive plan recommendation, and no opposition has been received for this request. As I mentioned in study session, there is a significant history of zoning and building code violations related to this property. That information is detailed in your report, but the question for the commission tonight is related to the land use and whether or not a self-storage facility is appropriate in this location. And so with that, I would be happy to answer any questions, and the applicant is here as well.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Okay, go ahead.
Another question came to mind. The use of alcohol wholesale is kind of interesting that it's put there as general warehousing, but alcohol is the only thing that's mentioned as buying and selling of something. Why is alcohol unique in the description of things that can be stored there?
That's a great question. The reason this is included is because we've often seen requests for alcohol distribution permits through TABC for locations like this or for warehousing uses. That's something that is called out separately in our zoning ordinance, and so we wanted to call it out separately here as well because we know that's an intended use for this facility. That said, wholesale is limited to storage and distribution to off-site retailers only. No in-person alcohol sales could take place, and no retail sales to the general public are permitted.
Sarah, would you know what the city requirements are for inspections of storage facilities like this? Do they do it annually? Is it just a fire inspection? Or can the police go in there? I'm thinking about stolen property or somebody doing a meth lab, or, you know what I'm saying?
Sure. Firstly, the subtenants, anybody occupying this building is subject to annual inspections from our fire department, all building code and inspection procedures as well. We do have Danielle Summers, who's our Director of Community Services here, that may be able to provide some more specifics if you have questions, but the way the ordinance is written right now, the primary user, which the tenant here is called Ready Spaces. So as an example, Ready Spaces would receive a certificate of occupancy if they meet all of our code requirements, and then they would manage leases to the individual subtenants. That said, the ordinance does include a provision that at any time the city can request a list of all users and uses within the building, and it does clarify that we have the ability to inspect as normal.
So all users would be
Subtenants.
Joe individual that decided to rent a small space there?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for staff? Do we have any questions for the tenant? Okay, if you wouldn't mind to come to the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Commission, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Daniel Box. I'm a zoning attorney with Winstead PC. Offices located at 2728 North Harwood Street. I'm the zoning attorney on the matter. Here together with me is a representative of the applicant who flew here from Baltimore to be with us today. So we are happy to answer any questions you might have. I understand that obviously there's already been some discussion about some of the case history. Happy to address that here. I think just for now, what I would like to do is just kind of put it out there. There's been some question since day one in terms of how our use would get classified. Of course, that happens across the Metroplex in all cities in the country where you have perhaps a zoning ordinance that was drafted back in the 80s. And as market develops and new development opportunities arise, we see adjustments. And then there's a question as to whether or not new uses can be fit into old use definitions. So the applicant was founded in 2016. And now this would be their 37th site. This would be the first time in which we've ever been classified as a self-storage facility. And obviously every city is different. We are okay with that, and we've been happy to have that conversation with staff. I just want to add that obviously there's only so much information that can be included in a staff report. We appreciate what is already there. There were some additional conversations, though, that I did want to make sure that, at least from our perspective, we saw the conversation as having continued all the way up through December of 2023 and going even until January 2024. For example, I have correspondence here with Marcos Narvaez on December 2023, just kind of trying to resolve that use classification issue. And so this really has been a good faith effort, I think, from the beginning to try to make sure that we got this right. And once we realize that we got it wrong, we think that we've worked diligently to try to put forward an attractive proposal here that includes some good landscaping and is going to be a good benefit to the building. So happy to answer any questions, but I wanted to put that out there right at the outset.
Thank you. Commissioners, let's start here.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments. So sounds like it was during a fire inspection in September of 23 that it was found that it was already operating as a self-storage. So when did that begin? When did it first begin to be operated as a self-storage?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you're looking for a particular month, I don't know if you
have a rough timeline.
That's okay. Yeah, in terms of a rough timeline, I think we're going to get an estimate on the date, but I would want to get an
And so,
exact.
and I understand, and so all the picture that we see here, the A10, F10, so that was worked, so would that normally, would Ready Spaces normally consider that to not require permitting to do that kind of, kind of work?
Yeah, I think it's dependent on a city-by-city basis. A lot of those walls, if you'll notice, they're actually adjustable. You can kind of readjust the spaces. And so even as recently as the last couple of weeks leading up to the hearing, when I was kind of corresponding with staff in the city's attorney's office to figure out what work would require permitting by way of readjusting the wall space after zoning, I think some of those questions were still kind of not left unanswered, but it was kind of determined it would be better for you just to submit, and then we'll find out later on. So again, I think these are questions that we have had, and obviously we've regretted that things ended up the way that they did by way of the violation history. But we actually did pay 2 zoning fines even after we had submitted this zoning application submittal, kind of in recognition of the fact that things went wrong. We wanted to put forth a good faith effort to show that, we want to rectify the situation here. And again, I think that the proposal here is the use, I think, is kind of uncontroversial by way of what exists there in the building today. And then we thought that maybe giving the landscaping would be an additional consideration and concession.
Okay, yeah, so is there an estimate as far as when it began operating? Okay, so there's no answer. It could have been an indeterminate amount of time. I'm just wondering, Ready Spaces, as you say, has more than 30 locations. It would seem like almost in any scenario, some permitting would be required to do this kind of work. So I'm trying to get a sense for who Ready Spaces is, how they operate, and as a
Certainly.
good neighbor, kind of trustworthiness, it's like, there's almost a sense of, let's just go ahead and we'll ask permission later. Okay, now we're gonna do it. So I'm just trying to get a sense of who we're dealing with here.
Certainly. I think you're asking the right questions. If I were in your shoes, I'd be asking them myself. As she tries to pull up that information, I think that the lease was negotiated for the space right around June of 2023, so it couldn't have been any earlier than there. By way of having moved in. And like you said, we're not strangers to the permitting process. We know that this is, kind of build out work does require permitting. Not to bore you with kind of internal dynamics at the office, but we actually have uncovered that one of our head of constructions there had been some issues in the past, and so we've since removed him. He no longer works with us, and we are now doing our best to kind of clean things up.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I see
Did want to,
Perla, yeah.
Perla Tavera, Director of Economic Development, Tourism, and Planning. I do want to just give a heads up. This is only for the land use. Any regulation and anything regarding permitting, we're handling in a separate matter. This would just be for the land use. But
I understand that, but it's still of interest to us, I think, as even citizens of Farmers Branch Planning and Zoning, because we have people come here all the time going through the process, and when you see somebody come through that's kind of not going through the process,
Correct.
it's at least, I think, it's at least worthy that we understand how and why that happened. And
we're
so,
starting
because
to,
we're going
yeah.
forward, now that we're done, what other changes might be done when we're not looking, kind of thing. So,
And we're
I
trying
think
to
it's
get
at
more
least, I think
aligned.
it's at least reasonable to understand, how this came to be.
Absolutely. And with the department changes, we're trying to get more aligned with everything. Thank you.
Other questions for our applicant? Yep.
You mentioned that you've had about 30 prior build-outs like this, and you said that maybe you didn't necessarily consider yourself a self-storage. What is it that you do consider this operation to be?
Yeah, so we really consider ourselves like a warehouse, traditional warehouse use, just with smaller spaces. And we think that's kind of an attractive, adaptive reuse of the site. So it's really the only thing that separates us from traditional warehouse, the size of those units. So obviously, when you look at a floor plan, you would, I'm sympathetic to staff, you might look at a floor plan and say, well, that looks like, self-storage, the units are so small. But what we're seeing is that there's less of a demand for these large warehouse spaces, and instead we have fortunately, more and more local businesses that are kind of interested in a smaller footprint where they're still able to do some shipping. This is lighter shipping, not big 18-wheelers, but we're used to being designated a warehouse use.
Right, and you said this is the first time that zoning has designated it self-storage versus general warehouse. Did it go to a zoning when you did the 30 other ones, or is this the first time that it's ever had to, I guess the fire inspection brought it up and?
Yes, this is the first time.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Sarah. We'll come back.
Sure. I'd just like to add a bit to that. Staff did reach out to several other cities where Ready Spaces or similar operators are located and did some research into classification. And he's correct, not every city classifies this as self-storage. There are other types of uses like co-warehousing, logistics center. It can depend on the city. The function is similar to what's presented here, where you have a certificate of occupancy holder that manages subleases. So that's the format we've tried to mirror. This falls outside of Farmers Branch definition for a single tenant warehouse. This is something different. Self-storage facility provides the context for them to move forward, but at council's direction, this is something that we could look into. Maybe this is a new type of use that is changing with the current, post-COVID economy. So we could have that discussion with city council and see if there's an interest in reclassifying or coming up with a new use in the future. But for now, self-storage meets the intent of what they're proposing, and in review with our legal team, we're able to move forward under this definition.
Thank you. Go ahead, Pat.
Think of a question. Okay, the business model is small business warehousing. So if a residence came to you and I'm downsizing and I need to store bedroom furniture here, is that business you would take or send them to some other business?
No, we would not take that business. And in fact, I think under PD 22, I don't think that would be permitted.
Okay.
So, I can't, there it is. Parking. I see a glitch here with regard, industrial warehousing, parking is, much lower requirement than, 30 tenants in the same place. I mean, how are we getting around the parking issue?
So the parking is determined by the square footage of each use within the building. So the self-storage facility was similar to a standard warehousing in terms of parking demand. So it's based on the square footage.
I get that, but when you lease a 100,000 square foot building and you have, area for 30 trucks and you have 5% office space and you only have 4 employees and you have 7 parking places for 4 employees, we're going to have in and out traffic all during the day with 15 or 20 or 30 or how many ever spaces they have. Isn't that going to be a significant increase in traffic and parking? And how do we get around? I don't see the connection here.
So the request that the applicant is making is to be treated just like any other warehouse. So if you've got 100,000 square feet of warehouse for a single user, you require 1 space per 1,000 square feet. It gives you your parking count. They're requesting to be treated the same way, even though this is subdivided into smaller stalls.
I know.
The
but I
overall
just-
square footage.
But you're going to have multiple users in that 100,000 foot building.
Right.
As opposed to one user.
Right. The parking requirement, rather than based on number of employees, those standards is based on square footage. So that's how it's proposed right now. That's a draft ordinance, so it's something that could be modified. The question would be, if the parking requirement is increased, would they be able to meet it based on their square footage?
It sounds like to me we're making ourselves a problem.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Actually, when we were putting this together, I kind of scratched my head at the same. Obviously, this is not the first time I've looked at a zoning ordinance, and I wanted to know how their parking worked. anticipating this very question. And so essentially what I encourage the applicant to do, I guess what I encourage the applicant to do was to actually go out there and observe the parking counts and actually to take a look at how many of their tenants were parking at the site at any one given time. And I guess before I proceed, I should point out, obviously these are local businesses, which often means that the tenants are usually doing this as a sort of side hustle, if I may use that term. This isn't, they have an ordinary day job, and then oftentimes in the evening they'll run and they'll deliver, they'll do orders, they'll process, they'll actually do the business operation. So we actually see that our tenants kind of have staggered business times. Some of them are there during the day, some of them are there late into the evening. And what that means is I encourage the applicant to go out there and actually count parking utilization over Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday 1 week, and then the next week do Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then the following week do it again, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And what we found was the maximum number of parking that any of our tenants to collectively use was 49 spaces. And I've got that here. I probably should have printed that out as an exhibit, but I'm happy to provide that to you.
Well, my concern again is, I'm thinking about if somebody leased, say, 5,000 square feet, they may have one employee there all day. Now, that one employee's got to have a place to park. And then if he's there all day, he must be there for a reason, which means meeting other people coming in and out, which is going to mean a requirement for those parking plots. The parking kind of bothers me, not just for this particular building site, but for that whole complex out there. I mean, it seems like to me, we could be causing a huge traffic jam. I mean, I don't know how many tenants you're going to lease to.
Yeah, I mean, if I can say, one of the fortunate things about our unfortunate case history is that we've already been operating at the site and we know how many parking spaces that we've seen that we actually do use. And again, at maximum utilization, we're talking 49 spaces. And so our parking requirement puts us in 91. I think if we were...
Is your occupancy at 100%? Because if your occupancy is at 50% and you're 49 spots, then maybe it's 98.
Yeah, it's a great next question. And let me see if Tia's got that answer here. Do you know what the... Okay, we're going to get... Yeah, we're going to get you an exact percentage in terms of our occupancy. But again, I'm happy to provide what I have as an exhibit, and then I probably should have printed off a couple extra copies here, but we got these. These were prepared back in September, thinking that we were maybe going to be before the body a little bit sooner, but happy to share this if you'd like to see it.
You mentioned people coming at night. Is this a 24-hour operation?
So there is going to be one kind of a security guard there on site, allowing people to get in and out, kind of controlling access. But yes, they will be able to do so 24 hours of the day.
I don't know if this question's for Sarah, or it may not be for you, but is there a way to structure this where it's, maybe we're approving it for the current owner operator, not permanent for this facility, just in case, I don't know, it becomes a problem?
Typically, we have to be careful with that. Zoning applies to the use rather than the user, and so it does transfer with ownership.
Other questions?
Yeah, I've got one more question about the parking. I think he mentioned that the requirement is 91. Do we know how many spaces are actually there currently?
Yes, give me 1 second.
So how many spaces are there?
So we have 120 spaces for just our tenant. So at the site counted our total of 180, and we occupy 2 out of the 3 suites. And so we've worked with the other tenant. They're limited to their 60. We have our 120 in case we do need it. Right now, the minimum parking requirement is just at 91, and our observed parking usage is at 49 at the maximum. We saw much lower numbers, but that's the maximum. I just spoke to the applicant. She says that today they're between 90 and 95% occupied. So I think these numbers are representative.
That's good.
Additional questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
I will remind us that this is a public hearing.
So I can make a motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
Any further comment on the item? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote to close the public hearing. All those in favor? All right, that carries unanimously. And with that, we'll hear a motion on this item.
I'll make a motion to approve as is.
All right,
I'd second that.
a second. Any further discussion on the item? Okay, we'll move to a vote to approve. All those in favor? Recommend approval? All right. Those not in favor to recommend approval? All right. And with that, it does carry, so that takes us to City Council on February 4th. Thank you very much. And that being our last item of business, we will conclude at 7:26 p.m. Thank you all for your service.